Kremlin's sharp power.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
What is Russia's disinformation network in Europe? On 5th March, French President Emmanuel Macron stated in his address to the nation that Moscovia is attempting to manipulate our thoughts with lies spread across social media. And deep down, it is testing our resilience. It is happening in the air, at sea, in space, and behind our screens. Disinformation has been a key element of Moscovian strategy since the Cold War, with significantly more resources and time allocated to it than to other forms of espionage. In his book, Agents of Influence, How the KGB Subverted Western Democracies, journalist Mark Hollingsworth cites a former head of KGB disinformation unit who asserted that only about 25% of the budget was allocated to traditional espionage, while the remaining funds were directed towards the slow process we call ideological subversion. We had a separate video dedicated to active measures and their types. At that time, we discussed that the list of tools used in the hybrid warfare that Moscovia is waging against Europe and Ukraine. And today we will discuss specific Moscovian information operations in Europe, their sharp power strategy, and how all of this is aimed at disrupting the internal stability of European countries, creating a negative image of Ukraine, reducing public support, and ultimately isolating Ukraine to face Moscovia alone. My name is Dmitry Kornienko and I'm the founder of the international analytical community Resurgam. So, let's explore. What is so-called sharp power? The term soft power has become commonly used in political science to refer to forms of influence that are not hard. That means in the same way as the use of military force. According to the original definition by Joseph Nye, the author of this concept, a country's hard power is based on coercion and is mainly a function of its military or economic power. Soft power, on the other hand, is based on attractiveness. It arises from the positive image of a country's culture, political ideas and policies, as well as a form of vibrant and independent civil society. When the Cold War era was coming to an end, analysts, journalists, and politicians in democratic countries began to view the efforts of authoritarian states, such as Moscovia and China, to exert influence through the prism of familiar concept of soft power. However, many of their methods are not soft at all. Therefore, Christopher Walker and Jessica Ludwig introduced the concept of sharp power, complementing Joseph Nye's concept of soft power, and emphasizing the aggressive nature of Moscow's or Beijing's strategy. The term sharp power accurately reflects the sinister and aggressive nature of authoritarian regimes, which have little in common with the friendly appeal of soft power. The efforts of authoritarian regimes to exert influence are sharp in the sense that they penetrate, break through, or pierce the political and information environment in targeted countries. In the brutal new competition between autocratic and democratic states, the sharp force tactics of repressive regimes should be seen as the tip of their dagger, stabbing indirectly and from behind. These regimes do not necessarily seek to win hearts and minds, as soft power does, but they certainly seek to manipulate their target audience by distorting the information that reaches them. Sharp force also allows authoritarian regimes to cut the social canvas of society, inflaming and intensifying internal divisions. This is something that Ukrainians are familiar with, when Moscow spent billions to intensify our divisions by treating apart the social unity of society. Unlike hard force, sharp force operates undercover. Authoritarian regimes exploit the openness of the political and information environment of democratic countries, and their effort to use sharp force are usually difficult to detect, which gives them an advantage in the form of a delay in the response. The targeted democracies do not immediately realize that they are facing a problem. Moscovia's information war against Europe can be called a manifestation of sharp force, a multifaceted ecosystem of state and non-state actors carrying out Russia's information influence operations. It began to take shape in the mid-2000s with the launch of Moscow's first English-language channel, Russia Today. The funds for launching propaganda channels were provided by Europe itself, just as grants for the liberalization of Moscovia or simply by purchasing Moscow's energy resources. The Kremlin has increased its capacity to manipulate content on the internet, strengthened its support for state-controlled think tanks, and generally formed a disinformation network in many regions of the world, particularly Europe. The Kremlin's offensive information campaign against European states is based on a variety of existing, tested, and successful tactics, including promoting Moscow's propaganda and agenda through controlled state media, RT, Sputnik, which will try to circumvent restrictions imposed on their work in Europe countries, for example through VPNs. The use of fake networks, clones of real European media outlets, imitating media such as Bild in Germany, 20 Minutes in France, ANSA in Italy, The Guardian in the United Kingdom, etc. The activities of sleeping sites, inactive websites that build their audience with non-political content, and, once they gain popularity, begin to spread disinformation. Manipulation on social media, in particular through large-scale bot farms. Moscovia's main goal in its operation to influence the West is to weaken international aid to Ukraine, in particular military support, and force the country to remain alone in its confrontation with Moscow and conclude an agreement solely on the Kremlin's terms, which will lay the foundation for further destruction of Ukraine. Other goals include promoting pro-Moscow policies and stirring up internal tensions in Western societies to undermine their willingness and ability to support Ukraine and fight back against Moscovia. We will talk about everything in detail. But first, please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment, because these activities promote the video in the first hour and thus allow us to spread information about all of Moscow's crimes, counteract them with information, and of course, motivate me further. Moscow State Media. Russia Today and Sputnik, founded in 2005 and 2014 accordingly, were two leading Russian organizations that broadcast or publish materials internationally. RT and Sputnik were widely regarded in Western democracies as the most prominent Russian external information threads. This perception of a security threat began to solidify in 2014 with the start of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, intensified after interference in the American and French elections in 2016 to 2017. In 2022, just days after the start of Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the European Union banned RT and Sputnik to counter Moscovia's information influence. Their channels were removed from broadcasting platforms, and their website was removed from major search engines and blocked by internet providers. However, despite this, RT and Sputnik continued to produce content. The European response brought a quick end to the delocalization of RT and Sputnik networks in Western countries, a process that began in 2010 with the launch of RT America in the United States and continued with the creation of editorial offices across Europe, such as RT France in Paris in December 2017. Two key events took place. First, in 2022, several networks were closed, including Sputnik offices in Germany, Italy, Greece, the Czech Republic, and Poland. The Paris office of Sputnik France was placed under external administration shortly after European sanctions were imposed. Meanwhile, RT America closed after losing its television providers, and RT UK's broadcasting license was permanently revoked by Ofcom, the British telecommunication regulator. The second path of restructuring was for the French and German language branches of RT. At first, they decided to continue producing content despite the distribution ban, the suspension of broadcasting agreements, a significant number of employee layoffs, and the termination of many programs and talk shows. In December 2022, the EU adopted a ninth package of sanctions against Russia, including against RT's parent company, TV Novosti. As a result, RT's assets were frozen in the EU, which effectively led the closure of its branches due to lack of funding. During 2023, both RT France and RT-DE were moved to RT's Moscow headquarters, along with almost all news production, news broadcasting, and talk shows. The loss of access of the European market and subsequent removal from platforms led to a rapid and significant decline in the audience of RT and Sputnik. Across all platforms, RT experienced a decline of approximately 40 million visits per month in 2023 compared to 2018. The sharpest decline was observed in the French, Spanish, and English versions of RT graph. The decline was even more pronounced for the French-speaking Sputnik website, which fell from 12 million monthly visits immediately before the invasion, January 2022, to just 350,000 a year later, before gradually recovering to 1.2 million visits by the end of 2023. The ways to evade sanctions. To mitigate these losses and circumvent the barriers imposed by sanctions, RT and Sputnik are resorting to three key strategies. First, they have moved to alternative social media platforms such as Odyssey, Rumble, Blocked in France, and Gab. All these platforms are popular among conspiracy theorists and far-right groups. RT also uses the video player of the Russian platform VK. Despite all these efforts, audience numbers remain well below 2022 levels. In spring 2024, RT's English language channels on Rumble and Gab had 110,000 and 60,000 subscribers respectively, while RT's French language channel on Odyssey had only 1,320 subscribers. RT promotes itself on these platforms under the slogan "Freedom over censorship, truth over narratives." Second, RT and Sputnik encourage their European audience to download VPNs to bypass blocking by internet providers, just as Western transnational media outlets banned in Russia do. The third strategy is more sophisticated and significantly surpasses the usual methods typically used by the media to distribute content. TV News and the federal agency Russia Segodnya, Sputnik's parent company, have created a parallel, fragmented digital infrastructure consisting of numerous mirror sites. These sites are identical to the original, but have different domain names, allowing them to be accessed within Europe without using a VPN. The German language RT website has at least a dozen mirror sites, for example, rtde.xyz, freedirt.online, etc., registered just a few days after European sanctions were imposed on 1 March 2022. They likely helped compensate for the loss of audience after the main domain de.rt.com was blocked. Similarly, Sputnik's France subdomain fr.sputniknews.com was replaced in August 2022 by the mirror site sputniknews.africa, which quickly surpassed its predecessor in traffic, coinciding with the change in the editorial line of the French language Sputnik. Dozens of additional domains have been identified, including Sputnik.news and RussiaToday.news, many of which were created before or after 24 February 2022. Why? Well, these mirror sites redirect users directly to the original RT and Sputnik platforms, bypassing restrictions and maintaining traffic. So, in response to sanctions, Moscovia's transnational media have deliberately fragmented and decentralized their digital infrastructure, which was previously centered around two main domains, rt.com and sputniknews.com. These sites now operate under various new domains, often using national or regional top-level domains such as .africa, .lat, .in, and .jp. This fragmentation complicates the work of European authorities who are unable to keep track of new resources, making it much more difficult to block or otherwise counteract the constant creation of mirror sites. Although some mirrors created after 24 February 2022, for example, swenter.site, the name RT News spelled backwards, were blocked by early 2024. Most remain accessible without the use of a VPN. RT editor-in-chief Margarita Simonian hinted at this tactic in April 2022. She compared these methods of circumventing sanctions to the underground, guerrilla activities of Soviet partisans during World War II. Now we are following the path of the partisans, so that no one knows it is us. We open a YouTube channel under a different name. 3 days later, it has 1 million views, and there, intelligence services realize it's us and shut it down. We open a new one. That's how we work now. But I won't reveal any more details. Let them not have all the cards in their hands. By the way, write in the comments, what do you think? Should European leaders abandon traditional views and use the same methods against Moscow that Moscow uses to undermine European countries and Ukraine? Should we become wolves to fight wolves? Operation Doppelgänger. In response to the blocking of their transnational media in Europe and United States, Moscow-based information influence operators are increasingly using covert and illegal methods to disseminate their narratives to Western audiences. The tactics, characterized by the systematic and undisguised use of disinformation, are not carried out directly by the state, but are delegated to specialized PR and digital marketing companies known as influence contractors. This practice emerged even before the war in Ukraine. During the COVID-19 pandemic, French YouTubers received offers from the Moscow-based company AdNow, which paid for the dissemination of videos discrediting the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines, aligning with narratives around Moscow's Sputnik V vaccine. The disinformation operation, called Doppelgänger, in European folklore, a doppelganger is a person's evil twin, the dark side of their personality, was already documented in 2022, in particular by the European organization Edu-is-Infolab and the American giant Meta. The initial platform for the operation is called RRN, named after the pro-Moscow website rrn.world. Reliable Recent News, formerly Reliable Russian News, a website created few months after the start of Russia's war against Ukraine, which published many fakes, including the so-called staging of the Bucha massacre. The peculiarity of Operation Doppelgänger lies in the publication of fake articles on pages that are identical in appearance and alternative domain names. Just as it did with well-known news organizations, Doppelgänger impersonated government agencies and internal organizations. The most famous examples are impersonating the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the German Federal Ministry of the Interior, or even NATO itself. For example, a website pretending to be the French Ministry of Defense announced that it was looking for 200,000 French recruiters to serve in the Ukraine. I think it is clear why this was done. In terms of content, the campaign focused on announcing fake government measures, such as introducing a tax to support Ukraine, doubling all military budgets, or preventative campaigns against alleged imported Ukrainian crime. Another part of the operation involved in the department of anti-Ukrainian websites. This content was specifically directed against the armed forces of Ukraine and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky through a series of animated cartoons. In addition, the operation also included the creation of maintenance of pro-Moscow websites. One such site, called War on Fakes, was created shortly after the new invasion of Ukraine. Mimicking fact-checking content, it was aimed at debunking real facts about Ukrainian defense. In other words, facts were debunked through fake fact-checking and replaced with real fakes. The entities that have been identified as conducting this operation are two Moscow-based companies, Struktura and Social Design Agency, also known as ASP. Sergei Kirienko, first deputy head of Russian presidential administration, is believed to be behind this operation. Since 2022, Kremlin-linked entrepreneurs Nikolai Tupikin and Ilya Gambashidze, founders of Struktura and ASP, have created a total of about 60 fake news websites, fake social media accounts, and posted staged videos and memes. The report by the French government agency for combating disinformation also notes that the official social media accounts of Moscow embassies helped to promote some of the content, indicating state support for Struktura and ASP. Although no public contract has been recorded in Russia's Unified Information System for public procurement, financial analysts show a sharp increase in the financial performance of these companies. Between 2021 and 2022, when the operation was launched, Struktura's revenue grew by 595% and its assets by 487%. ASP's revenue grew by 309% and its assets by 8%. Operation Portal Kombat. In February 2024, the French agency VIGINUM published its own investigation reporting on a Russian disinformation campaign in 19 EU countries under the code Portal Kombat. According to VIGINUM, Portal Kombat is part of the global Doppelgänger influence network that we have just discussed. VIGINUM found that the Portal Kombat network includes 193 so-called information portals that spread Moscow-generated content in Europe and have similar characteristics. In the case of promoting Călin Georgescu's candidacy in the Romanian elections, the Russians also involved paid TikTok accounts with millions of followers, as well as Telegram channels in their campaign. According to VIGINUM investigators, a few months after the start of the full-scale invasion into Ukraine, the Portal Kombat network focused on Western countries. The main goal was to form a positive attitude among European citizens towards the special military operation, and to destroy the image of Ukraine and its leaders. The websites of this network do not create their own content, but repost publications from three main sources: accounts of Moscow, pro-Moscow entities on social networks, Moscow news agencies, and official websites of local institutions or entities. Some of the websites contained the word Pravda in their domain name. For example, the English language portal could be found at pravda.en.com and the French language portal at pravda.fr.com. For example, from 23 June to 19 September 2023, the websites published over 150,000 articles. In an effort to reach a wide audience, this network uses a number of methods, including careful selection of pro-Moscow propaganda sources according to the target audience, mass automation of content distribution, and search engine optimization. Another example of Kremlin's long-term disinformation efforts is the activity of the Moscow-based Fund for the Support and Protection of the Legal Rights of Compatriots Living Abroad, LegFund, which has appointed a number of former intelligence officers to head its operations in European countries, and is also involved in financing propaganda websites in Europe aimed, among other things, at discrediting Ukraine. More than 40 LegFund documents obtained by the Danish public broadcaster DR from a source in the European Special Services indicate that there are at least several confirmed former intelligence agents among the operation's leadership. Among them is Vladimir Prostovkin, whom European intelligence sources refer to as the agent of the Moscow Foreign Intelligence Services (FIS), and in open sources as the curator of hedge funds activities in Northern Europe and the Baltic states. Another is Anatoly Sorokin, who, according to documents, is an FIS employee and curator of the hedge fund department for the Middle East, Moldova, and Transnistria. The head of the Institute of the Russian Diaspora, who is listed in official documents as a hedge fund project manager, is Sergei Pantelev, who has been sanctioned in EU countries as a member of Moscow Military Intelligence Unit specializing in psychological warfare operations. In 2020, National Security Report, the Estonian security police called hedge fund a pseudo-legal protection system that is a fund for influencing operations. Hedge fund's budget documents show that the organization spent hundreds of thousands of euros supporting several websites that claim to fight Russophobia and protect the Russian language in Europe, as well as some other marginal publications. In particular, hedge fund financed the activities of Golos.eu, an online portal that mainly criticizes the Ukrainian government and discredits Ukrainian military personnel and volunteers. Operation Matryoshka. Next Kremlin special operation is called Matryoshka, influences fact-checkers. Fake accounts contact fact-checkers or mainstream media asking them to verify information that is obviously fake. Operation Matryoshka aims to encourage journalists to cover fake news in order to increase its popularity. In other words, under the disguise of fact-checking and research of truth, it promotes a particular event, statement, or viewpoint, having first fabricated the data and laid the web. This information operation has been ongoing since at least September 2023. It is based on the publication of fake content, reports, memes, etc., which is then coordinated and spread in the form of responses to posts published on the network X by the media. Well-known people and fact-checking services from more than 60 countries. The operators of the Matryoshka campaign directly contact their targets on social media or by email, asking them to verify the fake content. The fake content is usually distributed as if it were from European or North American celebrities and media outlets. It serves to propagate and refer to primarily anti-Ukrainian narratives. The aim of the campaign is to undermine trust in certain media outlets, well-known individuals and fact-checking services while spreading content that serves Russian interests. Operation Voice of Europe. In March 2024, a pro-Moscow network financed by Viktor Medvedchuk, yes, that Viktor Medvedchuk, was exposed in the Czech Republic, which carried out influence operations through the Prague-based news site Voice of Europe, where commissioned articles by far-right members of European Parliament and politicians were regularly published. Kremlin documents show that Voice of Europe was initially linked to a Kremlin propaganda operation launched in January 2023 by Sergei Kirienko, first deputy head of the Kremlin administration. It was designed to strengthen Medvedchuk's support in Ukraine and position him among European opinion leaders as a viable replacement for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, promoting peace talks as an alternative to a possible nuclear war. The campaign called Another Ukraine had to present Medvedchuk as the head of a government in exile, the documents say. Kremlin political strategists Ilya Gambashidze and Nikolai Tupikin were involved to help with the launch of the project. According to the interviews with a dozen representatives of European intelligence services from 5 countries, the organization was used to transfer hundreds of thousands of euros, up to 1 million per month, to dozens of far-right politicians in more than 5 countries to spread Kremlin's propaganda in Western media, which was intended to cause division in Europe and strengthen the positions of pro-Moscow candidates in the European Parliament elections held in June 2024. According to another intelligence official, the site's status as a news organization was intended to provide cover to easily approach politicians under the disguise of interviewing them about Ukraine, anti-globalism, and other issues. And the Kremlin's latest favorite tactic is to exploit the weakness of the Western media field in the face of liberal opposition of the Kremlin. One of the tools used by Moscow's special services to infiltrate the Western media field is to create a victim of the regime who of course has a plan agreed with the special services in advance. Then the demonstrative liberal victim flees from Putin's regime, the sacrifice is accepted, support is provided, including the media, and then, using soft methods, this victim, thanks for the support you have provided and legalized, begins to do what it was sent to do. Of course, there are liberals who are truly opposed to Putin, but this is more of a statistical error than a figure worth considering. Therefore, if you consider any information from Russians to be a lie, you will be right in 90% of cases. And in your desire to find the 10% of truth, in the words of Muscovites, you will inevitably come across one of the dozens of Kremlin's information operations that they kindly create to undermine the security of your country. With a big Europe in your heart and a small Moscovia on the map, looking forward to new discoveries.